Her billionaire fiancé invited his ex to their engagement party and said he didn't owe her loyalty. Now he's begging. But what happened next left everyone stunned. Hi, my beautiful family. May God bless each and every one of you. Please write your city name in the comments so I know where my family is watching from, and don't forget to like the video. Some meetings are written in the stars, others are forged in fire, and Blake Shelton was about to discover the difference. The 42nd floor of Shelton Tech Tower hummed with the tension of a $2.8 billion merger hanging in the balance. Blake Shelton stood at the head of the obsidian conference table, his steel-grey eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying his territory. At 34, he had built an empire that made kings jealous and competitors tremble. His custom Armani suit couldn't hide the raw power radiating from every fiber. This was a man who had never heard the word impossible. But when the conference room doors opened and Paula Leal walked in, Blake felt something shift in his universe. She moved like liquid confidence, her curvy silhouette commanding attention in a perfectly tailored burgundy dress. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck and the intelligence burning in her dark chocolate eyes. This wasn't just any architect. This was a woman who designed skylines and reshaped cities. Mr. Shelton, Paula's voice was honey mixed with steel as she extended her hand. I'm Paula Leal, lead architect for your headquarters project. The moment their hands touched, electricity shot through Blake's system. Her grip was firm, confident, unimpressed by his billionaire status. Most women melted under his gaze. Paula met it with equal intensity. Ms. Leal, Blake's voice carried roughness he hadn't felt in years. I've heard interesting things about your work. Interesting? Paula's eyebrow arched dangerously. Mr. Shelton, I don't do interesting, I do revolutionary. I do what other architects dream about. The room fell silent. Blake's board members shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke to Blake Shelton like that. But instead of anger, Blake felt fascination. For the next 3 hours, they battled over blueprints. Paula's design was bold, innovative, completely contrary to everything Blake had envisioned. She wanted sustainable materials, community spaces, affordable housing integrated into the luxury tower. Blake wanted profit, prestige, and power projected into the Manhattan skyline. Your design is financially irresponsible, Blake argued, leaning across the table close enough to catch her intoxicating perfume. Your vision is socially irresponsible, Paula shot back, not backing down an inch. You want to build a monument to your ego. I want to build a legacy that matters. Their eyes locked across the blueprints, and Blake felt his legendary control slipping. This woman wasn't intimidated by his wealth, wasn't impressed by his power, and wasn't afraid to challenge him. She was magnificent. Perhaps, Blake said slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, we should discuss this further. Over dinner. Paula's laugh was like champagne bubbles. Mr. Shelton, I don't mix business with pleasure. It compromises judgment. Who said anything about pleasure? Blake's smile was pure sin. I was talking about strategy. The challenge hung between them like a live wire. Paula studied him for a long moment, her intelligent eyes seeing past his billionaire facade to the man underneath. One dinner, she conceded, gathering her papers, but we discussed the project, nothing else. As Paula walked toward the door, Blake called out, Ms. Leal? She turned, and Blake felt his breath catch. She was absolutely stunning, not just beautiful, but powerful, intelligent, dangerous in all the ways that mattered. Wear something red, he said with the confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. It's my favorite color. Paula's smile was pure fire. Mr. Shelton, I don't dress for anyone but myself. If red happens to be what I choose, consider yourself lucky. At exactly 8 o'clock, Paula walked into Le Bernardin wearing a red dress that should have been illegal. It hugged her curves like liquid fire, and her natural hair cascaded in loose curls around her shoulders. "Ms. Leal," Blake stood, extending his hand. I look like a woman who knows her worth," Paula finished, with a smile that could stop traffic. "Now, shall we discuss your building, Mr. Shelton?" But as the evening progressed, they discussed everything except buildings. Blake found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about growing up poor in Oklahoma, about building his first company in a garage, about the loneliness that came with unlimited power. In return, Paula opened up about her journey from a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta to becoming one of the most sought-after architects in the country. She spoke about her passion for sustainable design, her dreams of creating affordable housing that didn't sacrifice beauty. "You want to change the world," Blake observed over dessert. "I want to improve it," Paula corrected. "Change implies destruction. Improvement implies building something better. And what about us?" The question slipped out before Blake could stop it. Paula's eyes met his across the candlelit table. "What about us, Mr. Shelton?" "Blake," he corrected, "and I think you know exactly what I mean." The tension between them was palpable, electric, dangerous. Paula was silent for a long moment. "Blake," she said finally, his name sounding like poetry, "I think you're a man who's used to getting everything he wants." "Almost everything," Blake admitted, "but not you. Not yet." Paula's smile was both promise and warning. Good things come to those who earn them. As they left the restaurant, Blake walked Paula to her car. Under the streetlights, she looked like a goddess. "Thank you for dinner," Paula said. "Thank you for saying yes," Blake replied. "Will you say yes again? Tomorrow night?" Paula tilted her head, considering. "What did you have in mind?" "Surprise me," Blake said, stepping closer. "Show me your world, Paula. Show me what matters to you." Their first kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like gravity pulling them together. Blake's hands cupped her face as Paula's fingers gripped his jacket, and for a moment, the city disappeared. There was only this fire, this connection, this feeling that something monumental had just begun. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is dangerous," Paula whispered. "The best things always are," Blake replied. As Paula drove away, Blake stood on the sidewalk watching her taillights disappear. He had just met his match, his equal, his future. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter 2. Fire and Fortune. When a billionaire falls, he doesn't just stumble. He rebuilds the entire world around his obsession. 3 weeks later, Blake Shelton sat in his private helicopter watching Paula sleep across from him, completely unaware that she had just redefined what paradise looked like for one of the world's most powerful men. Their relationship had ignited like a wildfire, fast, intense, and completely consuming. After that first dinner, Blake had pursued Paula with relentless determination. But Paula wasn't a business deal to be closed. She was a force of nature to be reckoned with. The morning after their first kiss, Blake had shown up at her architectural firm with coffee and croissants. Paula had laughed, called him ridiculous, and invited him to see her current project, a revolutionary low-income housing development that managed to be both beautiful and affordable. Walking through the construction site, watching Paula command respect from workers and engineers alike, Blake realized he wasn't just attracted to her beauty. He was captivated by her mind, her passion, her unwavering commitment to making the world better. "Mr. Shelton," Paula had said, pointing to the building's solar panel system, "this is what real power looks like. Not just building empires, but building futures." That's when Blake knew he was in trouble. This wasn't just attraction, it was something much more dangerous. Now they were flying to his private island because Paula had mentioned loving the ocean. Blake had cancelled 3 board meetings just to see her reaction to paradise. "Where are we?" Paula stirred, her voice husky with sleep. "Almost home," Blake said softly, then caught himself. When had his sanctuary become their sanctuary? Paula stretched, her body moving with unconscious sensuality that made Blake's mouth go dry. She was wearing one of his shirts, and seeing his expensive fabric draped over her curves sent possessive heat through his veins. "Blake Shelton," Paula shook her head with amused exasperation. "You're absolutely insane. Who flies someone to a private island after 3 weeks?" "Someone who knows what he wants," Blake replied, taking her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally. "And what do you want?" Paula's question was loaded with meaning. Blake studied her face. Even after 3 weeks of intense dating, Paula remained partially mysterious, keeping parts of herself carefully guarded. It drove him crazy and made him want her even more. "Everything," Blake said honestly. "I want everything with you, Paula." The helicopter touched down, and Blake watched Paula's face light up as she saw the island for the first time. "Blake," Paula breathed, stepping out of the helicopter, "this is incredible." But Blake wasn't looking at the island. He was watching Paula's joy, the way the sea breeze caught her hair, the way her eyes sparkled with wonder. This woman who commanded million-dollar construction projects was delighting in his world like a child on Christmas morning. That night, they had dinner on the beach under stars. Blake's chef had prepared a feast, but neither was focused on food. The conversation flowed like wine, deep, intoxicating, revelatory. "Tell me about your family," Blake said, refilling Paula's champagne. Paula's expression softened. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died when I was 8. She cleaned office buildings at night to pay for my education. She used to say, 'Paula, baby, we might not have money, but we have dreams, and dreams don't cost nothing but courage.'" Blake felt something tighten in his chest. "She sounds amazing." "She was," Paula smiled sadly. "She died my senior year of college, never got to see me succeed, but I know she'd be proud." Blake took Paula's hand. "She would be incredibly proud. You're extraordinary, Paula." The moment stretched between them, intimate and profound. Then Paula's smile turned mischievous. "What about you, Mr. Billionaire? What drives Blake Shelton?" Blake's answer was serious. "I've been driven by proving people wrong for so long, I'm not sure I remember what I'm trying to prove anymore. Until ... "Until what?" "Until you." Blake's voice was rough with honesty. "You make me want to build something that matters instead of just something that profits." After dinner, they walked along the moonlit beach. Paula had changed into a flowing white dress that made her look like a goddess. Blake wore linen pants and a white shirt, more relaxed than he had in years. "Dance with me," Blake said suddenly. "There's no music," Paula laughed. "There's always music." Blake pulled her into his arms. "You just have to know how to listen." They swayed together, the waves providing rhythm. Paula fit perfectly against Blake's chest. It was the most perfect moment of Blake's life. No business deals, no pressure, no expectations. Just this woman in his arms and endless possibility. "Paula," Blake's voice was barely a whisper. She looked up at him, luminous in the moonlight. "Yes? I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Blake had never said those words to anyone, but with Paula, they felt as natural as breathing. Paula's response was to rise on her tiptoes and kiss him with passion that set his soul on fire. This wasn't just attraction anymore, it was something deeper, more profound, more dangerous. They made love that night in Blake's master suite, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. It was gentle and fierce, tender and passionate, everything Blake had never known he wanted. Paula was magnificent, confident in her desires, generous with her pleasure, completely present in every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled in silk sheets, Paula's head on Blake's chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his skin. "Blake." Paula's voice was soft in the darkness. This is crazy, you know that, right? 3 weeks ago, I didn't even know you existed. Now I'm on your private island, falling for a man who owns half of Manhattan. Blake's arms tightened around her. Crazy good or crazy bad? Paula propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. Crazy good, crazy amazing, crazy scary. I know, Blake admitted. I've never felt anything like this before. You've completely turned my world upside down. Good, Paula smiled, then grew serious. Blake, I need you to know something. I don't care about your money. I appreciate the helicopters and private islands and 5-star everything, but that's not why I'm here. Why are you here? Paula's hand moved to rest over his heart. Because of this. Because of the man underneath all the billions. Because you listen when I talk about my dreams. Because you support my work. Because you make me feel like I can conquer the world. Blake rolled over, pinning Paula beneath him, his eyes intense in the moonlight streaming through the windows. You can conquer the world, Paula. You're the strongest, most brilliant woman I've ever met. And I want to watch you do it. I want to help you do it. Their second round of lovemaking was even more intense than the first, desperate and claiming and absolutely perfect. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of paradise. They swam in the crystal-clear lagoon, explored hidden caves, had picnics on secluded beaches. Blake introduced Paula to his chef, his groundskeeper, his security team, people who had worked for him for years and had never seen him so relaxed, so happy. Sir seems different, his head of security, Marcus, mentioned to the chef. Happy, the chef agreed. Ms. Leal is good for him. But it was Sunday evening, as they prepared to leave paradise and return to reality, that the conversation happened that would change everything. They were packing in Blake's suite when Paula's phone rang. She glanced at it and smiled. It's my best friend Keisha. I should take this. Blake nodded, continuing to fold his clothes while listening to Paula's side of the conversation. Girl, you would not believe this weekend, Paula laughed. Private island, helicopter, the works. Yes, he's treating me like a queen. What? No, it's way too early for that kind of talk. Keisha, we've been dating 3 weeks. Blake's hands stilled on his shirt. He looked over at Paula, who was gesturing animatedly as she talked. Marriage? Are you insane? I barely know the man. Yes, I'm falling for him, but there's a difference between falling and jumping off a cliff. Something cold settled in Blake's stomach. After this weekend, after everything they'd shared, Paula still considered him barely known, still thought 3 weeks was too early to think about a future. Blake had been ready to propose. He'd actually been considering it, mentally designing the ring, imagining the moment, planning their life together. But Paula was talking like they were still in the casual dating phase. When Paula hung up, she found Blake standing by the window, his expression unreadable. Everything okay? She asked, moving to stand beside him. Fine, Blake said, but his voice had cooled several degrees. Just thinking about work. Paula studied his profile, sensing the shift in his mood, but not understanding it. Blake, what's wrong? He turned to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nothing, sweetheart. Just remembering that the real world is waiting for us. The helicopter ride back to Manhattan was quieter than the trip out. Paula dozed again, exhausted from their weekend of passion, but Blake stared out the window, his mind racing. He was moving too fast. Paula needed time, space, a normal courtship instead of the all-consuming intensity he was known for in business. He would pull back, slow down, let her catch up to where his heart already was. It was a reasonable plan. A smart plan. A plan that completely ignored the fact that Blake Shelton had never been good at reasonable, and when it came to Paula Leal, smart felt an awful lot like surrender. As the helicopter touched down in Manhattan, Blake made a decision that would change everything. He would give Paula the space she seemed to need, even if it killed him. He had no idea that in trying to protect their relationship, he was about to create the perfect storm for its destruction. Chapter 3. The Diamond Promise. When a man who builds empires decides to build a future, he doesn't just propose, he reshapes destiny itself. 8 weeks later, Blake Shelton stood on the terrace of his private vineyard in Napa Valley, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In his jacket pocket, a 12-carat diamond engagement ring burned like a secret fire, waiting for the moment that would change both their lives forever. The past 2 months had been a carefully orchestrated dance of restraint and passion. Blake had forced himself to slow down, to court Paula properly instead of overwhelming her with his intensity. It had been torture. Every instinct screamed to claim her completely, but he'd waited, watched, and learned what made Paula Leal truly happy. "Blake, this place is absolutely magical," Paula's voice carried across the terrace as she emerged from the villa, her hair flowing in loose waves around her shoulders. She wore a simple white sundress that somehow made her more breathtaking than any designer gown. Blake turned to face her, and his breath caught the way it did every time he saw her. 2 months of dating hadn't diminished her impact. If anything, knowing her mind, her heart, her soul only made her more devastatingly beautiful. "Wait until you see the sunset," Blake said, moving to wrap his arms around her from behind. Paula melted into his embrace, and Blake felt that familiar sense of completeness. The vineyard had been Blake's sanctuary for years, 500 acres of rolling hills and perfect grapevines. He'd bought it as an investment and discovered it was the only place on earth where his mind truly quieted. Now, with Paula here, it felt like home. "Tell me about this place," Paula said, leaning back against him. "I bought it 4 years ago," Blake's voice rumbled against her ear. "The previous owner was a third-generation vintner who'd lost everything in the recession. I intended to tear down everything, modernize it, turn it into a corporate retreat." "But you didn't." Blake smiled, pressing a kiss to her head. "I couldn't. The old man, Giuseppe, showed me around personally. He talked about his grandfather planting these vines with his bare hands, about the love and sweat soaked into this soil. I realized some things are too beautiful to change." Paula turned in his arms to face him. "You kept him on, didn't you? Giuseppe." "He's my head vintner now," Blake admitted. "Best decision I ever made. Well, second best." "Second best?" Blake cupped her face. "The best decision I ever made was asking you to dinner that night." They had dinner on the terrace as the sun set, Giuseppe's wine pairing perfectly with the meal. The conversation flowed easily, Paula telling him about her latest project, Blake sharing his plans for expanding into renewable energy. "You're really doing it," Paula said, taking his hand. "You're changing your company's entire focus." Blake's fingers intertwined with hers. "You changed my perspective, made me realize that building an empire doesn't mean much if you're not building a better world." It was true. In the 2 months since their island conversation, Blake had quietly begun shifting Shelton Tech towards sustainable technologies and social responsibility. His board thought he'd lost his mind. Blake didn't care. He cared about being the kind of man Paula could be proud of. "Blake," Paula's voice was soft, serious. "I need to tell you something." Blake's hand tightened on hers, his body tensing. "What is it, sweetheart?" Paula took a deep breath. "I love you." The words hit Blake like lightning. He'd said those words to her weeks ago, and while Paula had responded with passion, with tenderness, she'd never said them back. He'd begun to wonder if she ever would. "Paula," Blake's voice was rough with emotion. I know I should have said it sooner, Paula continued. I've been scared. Scared of how fast this is moving, scared of how much I feel for you. But I can't hold it back anymore. I love you, Blake. I love your mind, your heart, your passion for making things better. Blake silenced her with a kiss that tasted like wine and promises and forever. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you too, Blake whispered against her lips. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. That's when Blake knew the moment was perfect. The sun had set, painting the sky in magnificent purples and pinks. The woman he loved had just given him her heart. The ring in his pocket felt like destiny waiting to be claimed. Paula, Blake stood, his heart hammering. There's something I want to ask you. Blake dropped to one knee right there on the terrace, pulling the ring box from his pocket. Paula's gasp echoed across the vineyard as Blake opened the box, revealing a diamond so perfect it seemed to capture the last rays of sunlight. Paula Leal. Blake's voice carried all the authority he used to command boardrooms, and all the vulnerability he'd never shown another soul. 2 months ago, you walked into my conference room and changed my life. You challenged me, inspired me, made me want to be a better man. You're my queen, my equal, my future. Tears were streaming down Paula's face, her hands pressed to her mouth. I know we haven't been together long, Blake continued, but I've never been more certain of anything. I want to build an empire with you, not just for me. I want to change the world with you, wake up next to you, grow old with you. I want everything, Paula, everything with you, forever. Blake's voice cracked as he spoke the words that would either give him everything or destroy him completely. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my queen? Will you rule beside me forever? The silence stretched for an eternity. Paula stared down at Blake, at the ring, at the future he was offering her on the most beautiful evening she could imagine. Yes, Paula whispered. Then louder, yes. Yes, Blake, yes. Blake's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto Paula's finger. It fit perfectly. Blake had worked with the jeweler for weeks, designing something unique, something worthy of the extraordinary woman now wearing it. Oh my God, Blake, Paula stared at the ring through her tears. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Blake stood and swept Paula into his arms, spinning her around as the first stars appeared. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying and kissing all at once. I can't believe you just did that, Paula laughed, admiring the ring. It's enormous, it's perfect, it's completely insane. I wanted to give you something as extraordinary as you are, Blake said, pulling her close. Do you like it? I love it, Paula said, then kissed him with passion that made Blake's knees weak. I love you. I can't believe I'm engaged to Blake Shelton. You better believe it, Blake growled against her lips, because I'm never letting you go. You're mine now, Paula, forever. They made love that night with desperate passion, the engagement ring sparkling on Paula's finger. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets, planning their future. I want the wedding here, Paula said, her head on Blake's chest. In the vineyard. Something beautiful, but not too big. Blake laughed. Sweetheart, I'm worth $4.2 billion. Our guest list is going to be bigger than some small towns. I don't care, Paula said firmly. I want something elegant, sophisticated, but intimate. I want to marry you, not throw a circus. Whatever you want, Blake agreed. Although the media is going to go crazy when we announce this, Paula groaned. I forgot about that part. Hey, Blake tilted her chin up. You're extraordinary, Paula. Let them look. They announced their engagement 3 days later with a press release that sent shockwaves through the business world. The photos of Paula's ring broke the internet. The speculation about their wedding became a media obsession. But none of that mattered to Blake and Paula. They were drunk on love, high on their shared future, completely convinced that nothing could touch what they'd built together. Chapter 4. The night hell froze over. Some betrayals come with fanfare and explanation. Others arrive dressed as friends and smile while they destroy everything you thought you knew about love. The penthouse ballroom of Shelton Tower had been transformed into a golden paradise. 3 weeks of meticulous planning had created an engagement party that would be talked about for decades. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across marble floors, flowers flown in from 4 continents, champagne worth more than luxury cars flowing like water. Paula Leal stood before her full-length mirror, barely recognizing the goddess staring back at her. The custom Valentino gown was pure liquid gold, designed to showcase her magnificent curves while maintaining elegance that took her breath away. Her hair was styled in an intricate updo that highlighted her graceful neck and the diamond earrings Blake had given her that morning. Her engagement ring caught the light like captured fire. "You look like a queen," Blake said from the doorway, his voice rough with desire and pride. Paula turned to face her fiancé, and her heart stopped. Blake wore a custom black tuxedo that fit his powerful frame like a second skin. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his steel-gray eyes burning with possessive heat as they traveled over her body. This was her man, her future husband, the billionaire who had chosen her above all others. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Shelton," Paula smiled, moving toward him with fluid grace that never failed to make Blake's pulse race. Blake met her halfway, his hands settling on her waist as he pulled her close. "Mrs. Shelton-to-be," he corrected, leaning down to brush his lips against hers. "Are you ready to face our public?" Paula's laugh was pure music. "Ready to face 200 of Manhattan's elite who are probably wondering what a billionaire sees in an architect from Atlanta?" "Absolutely. They're going to see what I see," Blake's voice was fierce with conviction. "Brilliance, beauty, strength, and grace. You're going to own that room, Paula. You always do." 3 floors below them, the party was already in full swing. Manhattan's most powerful people had gathered to celebrate the engagement of Blake Shelton and Paula Leal. CEOs, politicians, celebrities, socialites who could trace their family money back generations. The guest list read like a who's who of American power and influence. Blake and Paula made their entrance at exactly 8 o'clock, and the ballroom fell silent. Every eye in the room focused on the couple descending the grand staircase. Blake commanding and confident in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. Paula absolutely radiant in her golden gown that made her look like visiting royalty. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake's voice carried across the room with natural authority, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the most important moment of my life." Applause filled the ballroom as Blake raised Paula's hand to show off her engagement ring. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks, society photographers capturing the moment for magazines that would publish the pictures worldwide. 3 months ago," Blake continued, his eyes never leaving Paula's face, "I met a woman who changed everything I thought I knew about love, about partnership, about what it means to build something meaningful. Paula Leal is brilliant, beautiful, and completely irreplaceable. She's my queen, my equal, and soon she'll be my wife." More applause, champagne glasses raised in toast, and Paula felt like she was living in a fairy tale. Blake's arm around her waist felt like home, the admiring gazes of Manhattan's elite felt like validation, and the future stretching before them felt infinite with possibility. "Thank you all for being here," Paula added, her voice clear and confident. "Blake and I are so grateful to share this moment with the people who matter most to us." The party flowed around them like a golden dream. Paula charmed business leaders with her intelligence, impressed politicians with her vision for sustainable urban development, and made society wives envious with her natural elegance and the obvious adoration in Blake's eyes. Blake never left her side, his hand constantly touching her, resting on the small of her back, holding her hand, brushing against her arm. He introduced her as my brilliant fiancé to everyone they met, his pride obvious and overwhelming. She's absolutely luminous, Margaret Whitfield, wife of a Supreme Court justice, whispered to her friend. Blake looks completely besotted. I've never seen him like this, agreed Catherine Morrison, whose family owned half of the Upper East Side. He's usually so controlled, so careful. With her, he's human. It was true. Blake was different with Paula, softer around the edges but somehow more powerful, like loving her had unlocked parts of himself he'd kept carefully hidden. Every time he looked at her, every time he spoke her name, every touch between them radiated genuine affection and desire. Paula was holding court near the champagne fountain, discussing her latest project with a group of fascinated investors, when Blake's assistant approached him near the bar. "Sir?" Jennifer's voice was carefully neutral. "There's someone here to see you." Blake frowned. "All our guests are already here, Jennifer. Who is it?" "Amanda Morrison, sir. She says she has important business to discuss." Blake's blood turned to ice. Amanda Morrison, his ex-girlfriend, the woman who had shared his bed for 2 years and his business secrets for longer. The woman who had cheated on him with his biggest competitor, stealing proprietary information that had cost Shelton Tech millions. The woman he'd sworn never to see again. "Tell her to leave," Blake said coldly. "She's not welcome here." "Sir," Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper, "she says it's about the European expansion. She has information about the Hartwell deal that could save you hundreds of millions." Blake's jaw clenched. The Hartwell deal was his attempt to break into the European market, a billion-dollar acquisition that would establish Shelton Tech as a global powerhouse. If Amanda had information that could impact the deal. "Where is she?" Blake asked against his better judgment. "Private elevator. She's waiting." Blake glanced across the room at Paula, who was laughing at something Senator Williams had said, completely unaware that Blake's past was about to collide with their future. "Give me 5 minutes," Blake told Jennifer. "Then escort her out." Blake made his way to the private elevator, every step feeling like a mistake. Amanda was waiting in the small lobby, wearing a red dress that was cut too low and fit too tight, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves. She was beautiful in the cold, calculated way that had once attracted him, before he learned what real beauty looked like. "Blake?" Amanda's smile was pure venom wrapped in sugar. "Congratulations on your engagement. She's lovely." "What do you want, Amanda?" Blake's voice could have frozen fire. "You have 4 minutes." Amanda laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "Straight to business. I always did love that about you. Very well. The Hartwell deal. James Hartwell is planning to back out. His board thinks American companies can't be trusted to maintain European standards." Blake's attention sharpened, despite himself. "How do you know this?" "Because I'm dating his son," Amanda said smugly. "Richard Hartwell tells me everything, but I can convince him to put in a good word with Daddy, smooth the way for your acquisition. All I need is the right motivation." "And what motivation would that be?" Amanda stepped closer, her perfume cloying and artificial compared to Paula's subtle elegance. "Partnership, Blake. Make me your European liaison. I know the market, I have the connections, and I can guarantee the Hartwell deal goes through." Blake stared at her for a long moment. Amanda was manipulative, treacherous, and completely untrustworthy. She was also right about her connections and her knowledge of the European market. The Hartwell deal was worth more than $1 billion, enough to establish Shelton Tech's global dominance permanently. "One meeting," Blake said finally. "Tomorrow. My office. If your information pans out, we'll discuss terms." Amanda's smile was triumphant. "Wonderful. You know, Blake, I always thought we made a good team. We never made anything but mistakes, Blake said coldly. Don't confuse business necessity with personal reconciliation. But as Blake returned to the party, a reckless idea was forming in his mind. Amanda was here, she had valuable information, and several of his biggest investors were at the party. If he could introduce Amanda as his new European consultant, it would show his guests that he was serious about global expansion. It would be a business coup that would overshadow even his engagement in tomorrow's financial newspapers. Blake found Paula exactly where he'd left her, now discussing affordable housing initiatives with a group that included 3 city council members and a federal judge. She looked up as he approached, her smile radiant. "There you are," Paula said, reaching for his hand. "I was just telling everyone about the community center project. Judge Harrison thinks it could be a model for other cities." Blake felt something twist in his chest. Paula was perfect, intelligent, passionate, completely focused on making the world better. She deserved better than what he was about to do. "Paula, sweetheart," Blake's voice was carefully controlled. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Before Paula could respond, Blake signaled to Jennifer, who appeared with Amanda at her side. The blonde approached with predatory grace, her red dress like a slash of blood against the golden elegance of the party. "Paula," Blake's voice carried across the conversation, drawing everyone's attention. "I'd like you to meet Amanda Morrison. Amanda, this is my fiancée, Paula Leal." Paula's smile faltered slightly as she took in Amanda's appearance, the too-tight dress, the calculating eyes, the way she was looking at Blake like a lioness, eyeing her territory. But Paula extended her hand graciously. "Amanda," Paula said warmly, "it's nice to meet you." "Likewise," Amanda's voice was honey over broken glass. "Blake has told me so much about you." Blake felt the lie roll off Amanda's tongue and didn't correct it. Instead, he continued with his reckless plan. "Amanda is my new European business consultant," Blake announced to the group. "She'll be heading up our expansion into the London market." The investors murmured with interest, already calculating the implications. Paula's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Blake's arm, the only sign of her confusion. "How wonderful," Paula said, though her voice had cooled several degrees. Blake didn't mention he was expanding the European team. "It's a recent development," Blake said, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "Amanda has connections that could be very valuable for the company." "I'm sure she does." Paula's smile was polite and completely empty. The conversation continued around them, but Paula had gone quiet, studying Amanda with the analytical intelligence that made her such a brilliant architect. She saw the way Amanda positioned herself too close to Blake, the way her touches lingered too long when she placed her hand on his arm during conversation, the way she referenced shared memories and inside jokes from their past relationship. "Blake and I have always worked so well together," Amanda said at one point, her hand resting possessively on Blake's forearm. "We understand each other completely." Paula felt something cold settle in her stomach. She excused herself politely and made her way to the ladies' room, needing a moment to process what was happening. In the marble and gold bathroom, Paula stared at her reflection. She looked perfect. Golden dress, flawless makeup, priceless jewelry, but her eyes held a question she was afraid to ask. When she returned to the party, she found Blake and Amanda in deep conversation near the windows, their heads bent together intimately. Several guests were watching them with curious expressions, clearly wondering about the dynamic between Blake, his ex-girlfriend, and his fiancée. Paula approached them with regal composure, every inch the Queen Blake had called her. "Excuse me," Paula's voice was silk over steel. "Blake, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Blake looked up, and for a split second, Paula saw something like guilt flash in his eyes, but it was gone so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. "Of course, sweetheart," Blake said, though his voice lacked its usual warmth. They made their way to Blake's private study adjoining the ballroom, a masculine space of leather and dark wood that reflected Blake's personality perfectly. Paula closed the door behind them and turned to face her fiancé. "Blake," Paula's voice was carefully controlled. "What the hell is going on?" "What do you mean?" Blake moved to pour himself a scotch, not meeting her eyes. "Your ex-girlfriend shows up at our engagement party and you announce she's your new business partner, without discussing it with me, without even mentioning you'd been in contact with her." Blake's jaw tightened. "It's business, Paula. Amanda has connections in Europe that could be worth hundreds of millions to the company. And you couldn't find those connections anywhere else? You had to hire the woman who cheated on you?" "This isn't about our past," Blake said, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. "This is about what's best for Shelton Tech." Paula stared at him for a long moment, seeing a stranger where her fiancé should be. "Blake, we're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to make decisions together. How does it look to your guests that you're hiring your ex-girlfriend without even consulting your future wife?" "I don't owe you consultation on every business decision I make," Blake said, the words sharper than he'd intended. The silence that followed was deafening. Paula felt something crack open in her chest, not her heart breaking, but her illusions shattering. "Excuse me?" Paula's voice was dangerously quiet. Blake realized his mistake immediately, but pride and stubbornness kept him from backing down. "Paula, you know that's not what I meant. But Shelton Tech is my company. I built it, I run it, and I make the decisions that are best for its future." "And what about our future?" Paula asked, her engagement ring catching the light like an accusation. "What about the loyalty you promised me? What about the partnership we're supposed to be building?" Blake's hands clenched around his scotch glass. "You're being emotional about this. It's just business." The words hit Paula like a physical blow. Emotional, just business. As if her feelings about her fiancé hiring his ex-girlfriend were somehow unreasonable. "Blake Shelton," Paula's voice was deadly calm, "if you think loyalty to your future wife is optional, then maybe you're not ready to be anybody's husband." With that, Paula turned and walked out of the study, leaving Blake standing alone with his scotch and his mistakes. Paula returned to the party with a smile that could have powered the city, charming guests and playing the perfect hostess while her world crumbled around her. She danced with senators and laughed with socialites and pretended that her heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 pieces. Blake watched from across the room, seeing the pain she was hiding behind her perfect facade, knowing he had put it there. Amanda materialized at his side like a beautiful snake. "Trouble in paradise?" Amanda asked with false sympathy. "Shut up, Amanda," Blake said without looking at her. "I'm just saying, Blake, some women don't understand that business comes first. Paula seems lovely, but is she really cut out for your world?" Blake turned to look at Amanda with eyes like ice. "Don't, ever, talk about Paula again." But the damage was done. Across the room, Paula was smiling and laughing and breaking apart, and Blake was standing next to his ex-girlfriend at his own engagement party, wondering how he'd managed to destroy the best thing in his life in less than an hour. The party continued around them, golden and glittering and perfect on the surface, but underneath, something precious had been shattered, and Blake was beginning to understand that some things, once broken, could never be made whole again. The fairy tale was over. The nightmare had just begun. Chapter 5. The Queen's Silent War. When a queen is wounded, she doesn't cry, she strategizes, and her silence becomes the most devastating weapon in her arsenal. Paula Leal disappeared from Blake Shelton's life like morning mist evaporating under harsh sunlight, completely, elegantly, and with a finality that left him grasping at empty air. The morning after the engagement party, Blake woke alone in his penthouse master suite, sheets cold beside him, the scent of Paula's perfume still lingering like a ghost of what he'd destroyed. She hadn't come home. For the first time in 3 months, Paula had chosen to sleep anywhere but in his arms. Blake's phone buzzed with a text that made his blood turn to ice. "I'm staying at my apartment for a few days. I need space to think. Please respect that. Paula." Space to think. The 4 words that had ended more relationships than infidelity and incompatibility combined. Blake stared at the message, reading it over and over, each word feeling like a nail in the coffin of their future. He called immediately. Paula's phone went straight to voicemail. "Paula, sweetheart, please call me back. We need to talk about last night. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. Please don't shut me out." Blake's message was met with silence that echoed through his penthouse like thunder. For 3 days, Blake tried everything. He sent flowers. They were returned unopened. He sent texts. They went unread. He showed up at her apartment building. The doorman informed him that Ms. Leal had left strict instructions that Mr. Shelton was not to be allowed up. Blake stood on the sidewalk outside Paula's building, looking up at her darkened windows, feeling more powerless than he had since he was a broke kid in Oklahoma. All his billions, all his influence, and he couldn't reach the one person who mattered most. Meanwhile, Paula had transformed her pain into pure, focused energy. She threw herself into work with laser intensity, arriving at her firm at dawn and staying until well past midnight. Her assistant, Keisha, watched with growing concern as Paula drove herself relentlessly. "Girl, when's the last time you ate a real meal?" Keisha asked, setting coffee on Paula's desk. "You look like you're running on fumes and fury." Paula looked up from her blueprints, her eyes slightly unfocused from exhaustion. She'd lost weight in just a few days, her curves becoming more angular, her face taking on the sharp beauty of a woman at war. "I'm fine," Paula said, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. "Just focused." "Focused on what? Working yourself to death?" "Paula, Blake's been calling the office. Maybe you should—" "No." Paula's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I don't want to discuss Blake Shelton. I don't want to take his calls. I want to focus on my work, on building something meaningful." Keisha studied her best friend's face, seeing the pain Paula was trying to hide. "Honey, what happened at that party?" Paula was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing her blueprint's edge. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I realized that I was living in a fairy tale, and fairy tales aren't real. Blake made it very clear that his business interests come before our relationship, that his ex-girlfriend's connections are more valuable than his fiancé's feelings. He made me feel small, Keisha, emotional, like I was asking for too much by expecting loyalty." "That bastard," Keisha breathed. "After everything—" "The proposal was beautiful," Paula said quietly. "The promises were beautiful. But promises are just words, and words don't mean anything when they're not backed up by actions." Paula's phone buzzed with another call from Blake. Without looking, she declined and returned to her blueprints. "I'm done being the woman who waits around for a man to decide she's worth fighting for," Paula continued. "I have work to do. I have a community center to design, housing projects to oversee, and a career to build. Blake Shelton can keep his billions and his drama." But late at night, alone in her apartment, Paula would stare at her engagement ring, still on her finger because she hadn't figured out how to take it off permanently. The diamond caught the city lights, and she would remember the night Blake proposed, the vineyard sunset, the way he'd looked at her, like she was his entire world. Then she would remember Amanda's calculating smile, Blake's cold voice saying he didn't owe her consultation, the humiliation of being made to feel like an afterthought at her own engagement party. The ring would blur through tears she refused to shed. Blake, meanwhile, was slowly going insane. His focus at work became non-existent. Board meetings became disasters as Blake's mind wandered to Paula. The European expansion deal fell apart when Blake couldn't concentrate long enough to follow through. "Sir," his assistant Jennifer said carefully, "perhaps you should take some time off. Clear your head." "My head is fine," Blake snapped, then immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry, I'm just distracted." Distracted was an understatement. Blake was obsessed. He found himself driving past Paula's apartment building at all hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He researched her current projects online, reading every article about her community center design, feeling pride and longing twist in his chest. Paula was thriving professionally. Her firm had landed a massive government contract for affordable housing development, and her name was appearing in architectural magazines as one of the most innovative designers of her generation. She was succeeding brilliantly, making a real difference in the world, becoming everything Blake had always known she could be, and she was doing it all without him. 2 weeks after the party, Blake made a decision that would either save his relationship or destroy it completely. He was going to fight for Paula, not with grand gestures and expensive gifts, but with the one thing she valued most, action that proved his words. Blake quietly cancelled the European expansion, dissolved Amanda's consulting contract, and redirected those millions toward funding Paula's community center project and affordable housing initiative. He couldn't force Paula to forgive him, but he could prove that her dreams mattered more to him than his business interests. The announcement hit financial news like a bombshell. Blake Shelton abandons European expansion, commits $500 million to urban development projects. Reporters immediately connected the dots to Paula's work, speculating about Blake's motivations. Paula read the news at her desk, her coffee growing cold as she stared at her computer screen. $500 million. Enough to fund her community center and housing projects for the next decade. Enough to house thousands of families, educate hundreds of children, transform entire neighborhoods. "He's trying to buy you back," Keisha said, reading over Paula's shoulder. "Maybe," Paula said quietly, "or maybe he's finally understanding what really matters." But Paula didn't call Blake to thank him, didn't text him acknowledgement, didn't reach out at all. Because Paula had learned something in the silence of the past 2 weeks. She didn't need Blake Shelton to build her dreams. She didn't need his money, his connections, or his validation. She was brilliant, successful, and completely capable of changing the world on her own terms. The woman who had fallen in love with Blake's passion and vision was gone, replaced by someone harder, sharper, more focused. Paula had discovered her own power, and it was intoxicating. Blake's gesture was impressive, but gestures weren't enough anymore. Paula needed to see fundamental change, real growth, proof that Blake understood why his behavior had been so devastating. The silence continued, stretching between them like an ocean. Blake's desperate attempts to reach her became less frequent, then stopped altogether, as he finally understood that Paula wasn't ignoring him out of anger. She was moving forward without him. The engagement ring stayed on her finger, not as a symbol of their love, but as a reminder of the lesson Blake had taught her, that she didn't need a king to be a queen. She had always been royalty, she'd just forgotten it for a while. The war of silence was Paula's to win, and she was winning it completely. Every day she didn't call him, every project she completed without him, every moment she thrived without his presence was another victory in the battle for her own independence. Blake was about to learn that when you wound a queen, you don't get a wounded queen. You get a warrior who no longer believes in fairy tales, and warriors don't forgive. They conquer. Chapter 6. Empire of Regret. When titans fall, they don't simply stumble. They take entire kingdoms down with them, and Blake Shelton was about to discover that losing love could destroy empires faster than any competitor ever could. Blake Shelton stood in his office windows, watching Manhattan buzz below, but seeing nothing except the endless replay of mistakes that haunted every moment. 3 weeks had passed since Paula vanished from his life, and Blake was discovering that running a multi-billion-dollar empire meant nothing when the woman you loved had erased you from her existence. His reflection showed a man who looked successful, perfectly tailored suit, expensive watch, commanding presence. But Blake could see what others missed: shadows under his eyes from sleepless nights, tension from grinding his teeth, the hollow expression of a man who had everything except what mattered. "Sir," Jennifer's voice came through the intercom, carefully neutral since Blake had become impossible to work with. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Blake closed his eyes, trying to summon the focus that had built his empire. The quarterly review with his board of directors, normally routine. Today, it felt like facing a firing squad. The boardroom was full of Manhattan's most powerful investors who had bet billions on Blake's vision. As Blake entered, he could feel their scrutiny like physical weight. These people could smell weakness from miles away, and Blake was bleeding vulnerability. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake began, clicking to his first slide. "Q3 results show." The numbers blurred together. Blake's mind, which normally processed complex financial data like reading bedtime stories, couldn't focus on anything except Paula's laugh, the way she'd challenge his assumptions, the feel of her hand in his during meetings. "Revenue growth of 15%. Blake continued, but confusion crept across board members' faces. He was reading wrong numbers, mixing up quarters, presenting information that made no sense. Margaret Whitmore cleared her throat. "Blake, I think there might be an error in your calculations." Blake stared at the screen, realizing he'd been presenting last year's data mixed with next quarter's projections, the kind of mistake he hadn't made since his first year in business. "I apologize," Blake said, his voice rough. "Let me correct that." But as he tried to find the right presentation, his hands trembled slightly. The board members exchanged glances, concerned, calculating glances that meant his leadership was being questioned. For the next hour, Blake stumbled through what should have been a triumph. Questions that should have been easy required long pauses. Strategic decisions became labored explanations that satisfied no one. "Blake," Harrison Foster said, after Blake had confused projections again, "perhaps we should reschedule. You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Blake insisted, but his voice lacked authority. "Just working through strategic considerations." "Strategic considerations?" Margaret's tone was sharp. "Blake, you've abandoned the European expansion, invested $500 million in charitable projects with no clear return, and now you can't present basic results. The board needs to understand what's happening." Blake felt the room closing in. How could he explain that he'd cancelled a billion-dollar deal because it required working with his ex? How could he tell these profit-focused people that he'd redirected millions toward Paula's projects, trying to prove his love? "The European expansion was based on faulty research," Blake lied. "I decided to focus on domestic investments." It was weak, and everyone knew it. Blake didn't make decisions based on faulty research. The board members looked at him like they were seeing a stranger. After the meeting ended in uncomfortable silence, Blake returned to his office and did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He poured himself a scotch at 11 in the morning. His phone buzzed with a call from his mother. Blake stared at it for a long moment before declining. He couldn't handle Rose Shelton's concerned questions about when she'd meet his fiancé, couldn't face explaining that there might not be a wedding to plan. Instead, Blake opened his laptop and typed Paula's name into Google, a daily ritual that had become as automatic as breathing. New articles appeared constantly. Paula's community center design had won a national award. Her affordable housing project was being featured in Architectural Digest. Her firm had just been selected to design a public library that would serve 3 different neighborhoods. Every article showed photos of Paula looking radiant, confident, successful. In interviews, she spoke passionately about sustainable design and social responsibility. She never mentioned Blake, never referenced their relationship, never acknowledged that her projects were now funded by his money. It was as if Blake Shelton had never existed in her world. Blake clicked on a video interview Paula had given to CNN about urban development. Seeing her on screen, animated, brilliant, absolutely magnetic, made his chest ache with loss. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman he'd proposed to, the woman he'd driven away with his own stupidity. The key to meaningful architecture, Paula was saying to the interviewer, is understanding that buildings aren't just structures, they're communities, they're dreams made concrete. When you design with love instead of just profit, you create spaces that nurture human potential. Blake closed the laptop, unable to watch anymore. Paula was out there changing the world, building dreams into reality, creating a legacy that would last generations. And he was sitting in his office, drinking scotch and destroying everything he'd worked to build. His assistant buzzed again. "Sir, Amanda Morrison is here to see you." Blake's blood pressure spiked. "I told you to have security escort her out if she came back." "She says it's about damage control, sir. Something about the financial news reports." Against his better judgment, Blake agreed to see Amanda. She walked into his office wearing a perfectly tailored power suit and an expression of fake concern. "Blake," Amanda said, settling into the chair across from his desk without being invited. "You look terrible." "What do you want, Amanda?" "To help you," Amanda said smoothly. "The financial world is buzzing about your unusual decisions lately. Cancelling the European expansion, investing in charity projects. Your board meeting this morning apparently went very poorly. People are starting to question whether Blake Shelton is still the sharp businessman they invested in." Blake's hands clenched into fists. "Get to the point." "The point is that you're destroying everything we built together because of some architect who clearly doesn't appreciate what you offered her." Amanda leaned forward, her voice taking on a seductive tone. "Blake, we were good together. We understood each other. We can be good together again." Blake stared at Amanda for a long moment, seeing her clearly for the first time. She was beautiful in a cold, calculated way. She was intelligent in a cunning, manipulative way. She was successful in a ruthless, soul-destroying way. Everything about her was the opposite of Paula's warm, genuine, nurturing brilliance. "Amanda," Blake said quietly, "you're absolutely right about one thing. I am destroying everything, but not because of Paula, because I chose business over love, profit over loyalty, your connections over her trust. I destroyed the best thing in my life for a deal that meant nothing." Amanda's expression shifted, sensing that this conversation wasn't going the way she'd planned. "Blake, be practical. You're a businessman first. Paula was a nice distraction, but don't." Blake's voice was deadly calm. "Don't ever call Paula a distraction. She was the best part of me, the part that made everything else worthwhile. And I lost her because I listened to people like you who think love is a weakness instead of the greatest strength anyone can have." Blake stood up, moving to the window again. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with life and energy and possibility. Somewhere in that maze of buildings, Paula was creating something beautiful and meaningful. And here he was, surrounded by luxury and power and absolutely miserable. "I want you to leave," Blake said without turning around. "I want you to leave my office, my building, and my life. Don't come back, don't call, don't try to contact me ever again." "Blake, you're making a mistake." "The mistake was letting you back into my life for even 5 minutes, Blake said, finally turning to face her. "The mistake was prioritizing a business deal over the woman I love. The mistake was thinking that someone like you could ever understand what I had with Paula." After Amanda left, Blake sat alone in his office, watching the sun set over Manhattan. His empire was still intact, barely. His board was concerned but not yet ready to revolt. His bank accounts were still overflowing with more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But Blake felt poorer than he had as a kid in Oklahoma because he'd had everything that mattered and thrown it away for absolutely nothing. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother. "Saw the news about Paula's housing project? Mom wants to know when you're bringing her to dinner. Also, when's the wedding? She's driving me crazy with planning questions." Blake stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Not sure about timing yet. Still working out details." It wasn't technically a lie. Blake was working out details, specifically how to win back the love of his life when she'd made it clear that she'd moved forward without him. As night fell over Manhattan, Blake made a decision. He was going to fight for Paula, but not with grand gestures or expensive gifts. He was going to prove to her that he'd learned from his mistakes, that he understood what really mattered, that he was worthy of the love she'd once given him so freely. The problem was, Blake had no idea how to prove any of those things to a woman who had perfected the art of not caring about Blake Shelton anymore. His empire was crumbling from the inside out, his focus was shattered, his legendary business instincts had abandoned him completely, all because he'd lost the woman who had made him feel like more than just a billionaire. Blake was about to discover that winning back a queen required more than money, power, or influence. It required becoming the kind of man who deserved a queen in the first place. And Blake wasn't sure that man existed anymore. Chapter 7. She soars, he shatters. When queens rise from the ashes of broken fairy tales, they don't just survive, they transform into legends, while the kings who wounded them watch from the ruins of their own making. 6 weeks after their world imploded, Paula Leal stood on the Metropolitan Museum steps, cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions about her housing project. She wore a stunning navy Vera Wang dress, her natural hair in an elegant crown braid that made her look like royalty. The Humanitarian of the Year award in her hands caught the sun, but her radiant smile truly illuminated the scene. "Ms. Leal," reporters called, "how does it feel to be honored by the National Urban Development Council?" Paula's smile was pure confidence. "It feels incredible to see sustainable, affordable housing getting recognition. This award belongs to every family who will have a safe, beautiful place to call home." From his penthouse 40 blocks away, Blake watched the live coverage with the intensity of a man observing his own execution. Paula looked magnificent, glowing with success, radiating confidence, speaking with the passion that had first captured his heart. She looked like a woman who had everything she'd ever wanted. She looked like a woman who had completely forgotten Blake Shelton existed. The past 6 weeks had been systematic destruction of everything Blake had built. His legendary focus was shattered. Board meetings became disasters. Strategic decisions required painful deliberation. His stock price fluctuated as investors questioned his leadership. Meanwhile, Paula's star had risen like a meteor. Her community center design graced Architectural Digest's cover. Her housing project received federal funding. She'd been profiled in Forbes as the architect reshaping America's cities and interviewed on 60 Minutes. Every article mentioned her brilliance, vision, and commitment to change. None mentioned Blake Shelton. It was as if their relationship had been erased from public memory. Blake had been avoiding his mother's increasingly concerned voicemails, unable to explain that the wedding she was excited about would never happen. Instead, Blake researched Paula's life like a private investigator. Her firm's website, project announcements, interview schedules. Blake knew Paula's professional life better now than when they'd been engaged. That's how he discovered Paula was dating someone new. Dr. Jonathan Hayes, cardiovascular surgeon at Mount Sinai, Harvard graduate, published researcher saving children's lives. The man was brilliant, successful, devoted to making the world better, everything Blake had once thought he was. The photos had appeared 3 weeks ago, Paula and Jonathan at a charity gala, looking perfect together. Jonathan was handsome in an understated way, tall, lean, kind eyes, and a gentle smile suggesting he'd never hurt anyone. In photos, he looked at Paula like she was a miracle he couldn't believe he'd been blessed to witness. Paula looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way that made Blake's chest cave in. Blake had investigated Jonathan thoroughly. Dr. Hayes was literally perfect. No scandals, no drama, no complications. He volunteered at free clinics, donated half his salary to research, had never made a decision putting personal gain over human welfare. He was everything Blake wasn't, and everything Paula deserved. On television, the reporter was interviewing Paula about her personal life. Blake turned the volume up, torturing himself. "Ms. Leal, there have been rumors about your relationship status. Are you seeing anyone special?" Paula's smile became more private, genuine. "I am. Dr. Jonathan Hayes is an incredible man who supports my work and shares my values. We're very happy together." The words hit Blake like physical blows. Very happy together. Present tense. Paula had moved on completely, found someone better, built a new life that didn't include even the memory of Blake Shelton. Blake turned off the television and walked to his bar cart, pouring himself a scotch with hands that shook slightly. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but Blake had stopped caring about things like appropriate drinking hours weeks ago. His phone rang again, this time his brother Michael calling from Oklahoma. "Blake, what the hell is going on?" Michael's voice was sharp with concern. "Mom's been calling me crying because you won't return her calls. She's worried sick about you." Blake closed his eyes, leaning against the window. "I'm fine, Michael." "Bullshit. I saw the financial news reports about Shelton Tech's stock fluctuations. I saw the articles questioning your leadership. And where's this fiancé Mom keeps asking about? When do we get to meet the miracle woman who tamed Blake Shelton?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Blake hadn't told anyone in his family that Paula was gone, hadn't explained that the engagement was over, hadn't admitted that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life. "It's complicated," Blake said finally. "Complicated how?" "Blake, talk to me. You sound like hell. You look like hell in every photo I've seen, and you're apparently running your company into the ground. What happened?" Blake was quiet for so long that Michael thought the call had dropped. "I lost her," Blake said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lost Paula. I was an idiot. I made terrible choices, and I lost the only woman I've ever loved." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Jesus, Blake," Michael breathed. "How bad did you screw up?" "Bad enough that she won't take my calls. Bad enough that she's dating a surgeon who's apparently perfect in every way I'm not. Bad enough that she looks happier without me than she ever did with me." Blake told Michael everything. The engagement party, Amanda's manipulation, his own stupid decisions, Paula's devastating silence, the complete collapse of his focus and judgment since she disappeared from his life. "You invited your ex-girlfriend to your engagement party." Michael's voice was incredulous. "Blake, what the hell were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking," Blake admitted. "I was being the same arrogant bastard who built this company by prioritizing profit over everything else. I treated Paula like a business asset instead of the woman I love. And now she's gone." "And now she's gone," Blake confirmed. "Michael, I can't concentrate on anything. I can't make decisions. I can't function without her. My board is talking about bringing in consultants to evaluate my fitness as CEO." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Blake, have you actually apologized to her? Like, really apologized?" "She won't see me, won't take my calls, won't respond to messages. She's made it clear that I no longer exist in her world." "What about showing up at her office, her apartment, making a grand gesture?" Blake laughed bitterly. Grand gestures are what got me into this mess. Paula doesn't want flowers or jewelry or public declarations. She wants integrity, loyalty, and respect. Things I failed to give her when it mattered. So give them to her now. It's too late, Blake said, staring out at Manhattan. She's moved on. She's happy. She's building an incredible life without me, and honestly, she's better off. Dr. Perfect probably never makes selfish decisions or prioritizes business over love. He probably never makes her feel like an afterthought. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Blake, you're my brother, and I love you, but you're being a coward. Excuse me. You're sitting in your penthouse feeling sorry for yourself instead of fighting for the woman you love. You're assuming she's better off without you instead of proving you've learned from your mistakes. You're giving up because it's easier than facing the possibility that you might fail. Blake felt anger flare in his chest. I'm not giving up. I'm accepting reality. Paula has made her choice, and it's not me. Has she? Or have you just convinced yourself it's hopeless so you don't have to risk getting hurt again? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Blake wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the reasons why pursuing Paula would be pointless. But Michael's words hit uncomfortably close to home. That evening, Blake did something he hadn't done in months. He left his office before midnight. Instead of going home to his empty penthouse, he walked the streets of Manhattan, trying to clear his head and figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with the rest of his life. He found himself outside Paula's apartment building, looking up at her windows like a lovesick teenager. The doorman recognized him and shook his head sympathetically. She's not home, Mr. Shelton. Saw her leave around 7 with that doctor fellow. They looked dressed up for something fancy. Blake nodded, feeling hollow. Of course, Paula was out with Jonathan, probably at another charity gala or cultural event, building a life filled with meaning and purpose while Blake stood on sidewalks like a stalker. As Blake walked away, his phone buzzed with a text message that made his heart stop. Blake, I heard about the board meeting tomorrow. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Despite everything, I care about your well-being. Paula. Blake stared at the message, reading it over and over. Paula had reached out. After 6 weeks of absolute silence, she'd sent him a message that suggested she didn't completely hate him. Blake's fingers hovered over his phone's keyboard for 10 minutes before he finally typed back, "Thank you. That means more than you know." Paula's response came immediately. "Take care of yourself." 3 words, 12 letters. But they were the first words Paula had spoken to him in 6 weeks, and they felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. For the first time since the engagement party, Blake felt something other than despair. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of hope. Paula still cared about his well-being. She was dating someone else, building a life without him, succeeding brilliantly on her own terms. But somewhere in her heart, she still cared enough to reach out when she thought he might be struggling. It wasn't much. It probably didn't mean what Blake desperately wanted it to mean, but it was something. And for a man who'd had nothing for 6 weeks, something felt like everything. Blake walked home through the glittering Manhattan night, his mind finally clear for the first time in weeks. He had a board meeting to survive, a company to save, and a life to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, a queen to win back. But first, he had to become the kind of man who deserved a second chance with royalty. Chapter 8. The Gala Where Hearts Collide Again. Sometimes fate disguises itself as charity events, and the most dangerous battles are fought under crystal chandeliers, while society's elite sips champagne and pretends not to watch empires collide. The Metropolitan Children's Hospital Annual Gala was Manhattan's most exclusive charity event, a glittering showcase where New York's elite gathered to write massive checks while wearing clothes that cost more than most people's annual salaries. This year's gala was particularly anticipated because Paula Leal, the architect whose community center design had captured national attention, was receiving the Humanitarian of the Year award. Blake Shelton stood in the marble foyer of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, adjusting his black Armani tuxedo with hands that weren't entirely steady. He hadn't planned to attend, hadn't planned to put himself through the torture of watching Paula accept accolades while standing beside Dr. Perfect. But his mother had called that morning, her voice bright with excitement. "Blake, honey, I saw that your Paula is getting some big award tonight. I'm so proud of her. You must be bursting with happiness. When are you two setting a wedding date? I need time to plan." Blake had made non-committal sounds and hung up, but Rose's words had haunted him all day. Your Paula. If only his mother knew that Paula hadn't been his for months, that she'd built an incredible life that had no room for Blake Shelton in it. Now, standing in the ballroom's entrance, Blake questioned his sanity. What was he doing here? Paula had made her feelings clear through 6 weeks of absolute silence. She was dating Jonathan Hayes, a man who probably never made selfish decisions or prioritized business over love. She was thriving without Blake, succeeding brilliantly, creating a legacy that would outlast any fortune. But Blake couldn't stay away. Some masochistic part of him needed to see Paula's triumph in person, needed to witness the woman he'd lost accepting recognition for the work that mattered more to her than any engagement ring ever could. "Blake Shelton," a familiar voice called out. "I was wondering if you'd be here tonight." Blake turned to find Margaret Whitmore, one of his board members, approaching with her husband. Margaret's smile was carefully neutral, the expression of someone who'd noticed Blake's recent professional struggles but was too polite to mention them directly. "Margaret," Blake forced a smile. "Wouldn't miss it. Paula's being honored tonight." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Of course. You must be so proud of her. The community center project is extraordinary, truly revolutionary work." The conversation was interrupted by a ripple of attention moving through the ballroom. Blake's breath caught as Paula appeared at the top of the grand staircase, and the entire room seemed to pause in appreciation. She was absolutely breathtaking in a midnight blue Zac Posen gown that flowed like liquid silk around her curves. Her hair was styled in an elegant low bun that showcased diamond earrings, not the ones Blake had given her, he noticed with a sharp pang of loss. She moved down the staircase with the grace of a woman who belonged in palaces, her smile radiant as she acknowledged the admiring gazes following her progress. But it was the man beside her that made Blake's chest feel like it was caving in. Dr. Jonathan Hayes looked exactly like what he was, a brilliant, successful man completely devoted to the woman on his arm. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his smile genuine and warm, his attention focused entirely on Paula, like she was the only person in the room. When Paula stumbled slightly on the staircase, Jonathan's hand was there immediately to steady her, protective and gentle. The way Jonathan looked at Paula made Blake remember how he used to look at her, like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe he'd been blessed to witness. The difference was that Jonathan still had the right to look at her that way. "They make a stunning couple," Margaret observed, following Blake's gaze. "Dr. Hayes is wonderful, brilliant surgeon, does incredible work with children's heart surgery. I heard he's completely devoted to her." Blake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm sure he is." The evening proceeded like slow torture. Blake watched from across the ballroom as Paula charmed donors, discussed her projects with passionate intelligence, and accepted congratulations on her relationship with Jonathan. Every smile she gave the surgeon felt like a knife twisting in Blake's chest. During cocktail hour, Blake found himself nursing a scotch and studying Paula from afar, like a detective gathering evidence. She looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way that had nothing to do with professional success and everything to do with personal contentment. Jonathan never left her side, bringing her champagne without being asked, making her laugh with quiet comments, touching her arm with casual affection that spoke of intimacy and comfort. They looked like a couple who belonged together. They looked like people who made each other better. "Blake?" A soft voice beside him made Blake turn. Paula stood there, stunning and close enough to touch, her dark eyes unreadable. "Paula." Blake's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "Congratulations on the award. You deserve it." "Thank you." Paula's smile was polite, but distant. "I wasn't sure you'd be here tonight." "I wouldn't miss seeing you honored for your work," Blake said honestly. "The community center is extraordinary. You're changing lives." For a moment, something flickered in Paula's eyes, a shadow of the warmth that used to exist between them. But it was gone so quickly Blake wondered if he'd imagined it. "How are you?" Paula asked, and Blake could hear genuine concern in her voice. "I heard about the board meeting challenges." Blake almost laughed. Even now, after everything he'd done to hurt her, Paula was worried about his well-being. It was so perfectly her, compassionate even towards someone who'd broken her heart. "I'm managing," Blake lied. "Corporate life, you know how it is." Paula studied his face with the analytical intelligence that had first captured his attention. Blake had lost weight in the past months, his face more angular, his eyes holding a haunted quality that expensive suits couldn't hide. "Blake," Paula started, but was interrupted by Jonathan's approach. "There you are, beautiful," Jonathan said, slipping his arm around Paula's waist with easy affection. "They're about to start dinner." Blake watched the casual intimacy between them and felt something die inside his chest. Jonathan's touch was comfortable, welcomed, natural. Paula leaned into him slightly, unconsciously, the way she used to lean into Blake. "Dr. Hayes." Blake extended his hand with forced civility. "Congratulations on your relationship. Paula's an extraordinary woman." Jonathan's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Thank you. I'm the luckiest man in New York. Paula's not just brilliant, she's the most compassionate person I've ever met." The conversation was torture. Jonathan spoke about Paula with obvious adoration, mentioning her kindness to his patients, her support of his research, her ability to make everyone around her feel valued and heard. Everything Jonathan said was true. Paula was all those things and more. But hearing another man catalogue her virtues felt like listening to someone describe all the treasures Blake had thrown away. "If you'll excuse us," Jonathan said politely, "I believe they're seating us for dinner." Blake watched them walk away, Jonathan's hand on the small of Paula's back. Paula's head tilted toward him as he whispered something that made her laugh. They looked perfect together, two good people building something meaningful. Dinner was served at tables of 8, and Blake found himself seated with Manhattan's business elite, making polite conversation while stealing glances at Paula's table across the ballroom. She was seated between Jonathan and the hospital's chief administrator, discussing her latest housing project with animated passion. Her face glowed with enthusiasm as she spoke, her hands gesturing expressively, completely in her element. Blake remembered dozens of dinners like this when Paula had been beside him, her intelligence impressing his colleagues, her warmth making even the most intimidating business deals feel manageable. She'd been his secret weapon, his better half, the person who made him want to build something more meaningful than just wealth. Now she was doing exactly that, just without him. When Paula was called to the stage to accept her award, the entire ballroom rose in thunderous applause. Blake stood too, clapping harder than anyone, his heart swelling with pride and breaking with loss simultaneously. Paula's acceptance speech was perfect, gracious, humble, passionate about the work still to be done. She thanked her team, the hospital, the donors who made her projects possible. She spoke about architecture as a force for social change, about building communities instead of just buildings. She didn't mention Blake, not even when she thanked everyone who believed in this vision. It was as if their entire relationship had been erased from the story of her success. After the formal program ended, The evening shifted to dancing and private conversations. Blake watched from the bar as Paula and Jonathan moved together on the dance floor, perfectly matched in rhythm and grace. Jonathan held her like she was precious, spinning her with gentle expertise, making her laugh with quiet words Blake couldn't hear. That's when Blake made the decision that would either save his soul or destroy what was left of his dignity. He waited until the song ended, then approached Paula and Jonathan with the purposeful stride that had intimidated boardrooms full of Fortune 500 CEOs. "Paula," Blake's voice carried across the dance floor, drawing attention from nearby couples. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The request hung in the air like a challenge. Jonathan's expression tightened slightly, protective instincts obviously activated. Paula looked between the two men, her face unreadable. "Blake," Paula said carefully, "I don't think that's appropriate. Please." The word came out rawer than Blake had intended, carrying months of suppressed pain and desperate need. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Society reporters suddenly found reasons to drift closer. Board members pretended not to watch, while straining to hear every word. This was Manhattan drama at its finest. A billionaire publicly pleading with his ex-fiancée while her new boyfriend watched. Jonathan stepped forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "I think the lady said no, Mr. Shelton." Blake's gaze shifted to Jonathan, and for a moment the two men sized each other up like opponents in some ancient ritual. Jonathan was protecting what was his. Blake was fighting for what he'd lost. Both men recognized the stakes. "It's okay, Jonathan," Paula said finally, her voice carefully controlled. 5 minutes. Blake felt relief flood through him as Paula walked toward a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the dance floor and the watching eyes. But when they reached the secluded alcove near the silent auction tables, Paula turned to face him with an expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "What do you want, Blake?" Paula's voice was professional, distant, the tone she might use with a stranger. Looking at her up close, Blake could see all the details he'd memorized and lost. The tiny scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way her eyes became darker when she was emotional, the subtle curve of her lips that had once smiled, just for him. "I want to apologize," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion. "Really apologize, not just for the engagement party, but for everything, for prioritizing business over us, for making you feel like you didn't matter, for being the kind of man who could hurt someone as incredible as you." Paula's expression didn't change. "Blake!" "I was wrong," Blake continued, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. "I was arrogant and selfish, and so used to getting everything I wanted that I forgot how to appreciate what I had. You were the best thing in my life, Paula. You made me better, made me want to build something meaningful instead of just profitable, and I threw it all away for a business deal that meant nothing." Blake dropped to one knee right there in the Plaza Hotel ballroom in front of 500 of Manhattan's most powerful people, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I know you're with Jonathan now. I know you're happy, and he treats you the way you deserve to be treated. But I had to tell you that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. I had to tell you that I love you, not loved you, love you, present tense, forever. I had to tell you that every success I have feels empty without you to share it with." The ballroom was completely silent now, every guest straining to hear Blake's public confession. Camera phones appeared like magic, society photographers capturing the moment for tomorrow's headlines. "I'll do anything, Paula," Blake's voice cracked with desperation. "I'll give up the company, move to another city, donate every penny I have to your projects. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I understand what really matters. Just please, please don't write us off completely. Please tell me there's some small part of you that remembers what we had, that believes people can change, that thinks I might be worth a second chance." Paula stared down at Blake for what felt like an eternity, her face a mask of careful control. Around them, the ballroom held its collective breath, waiting for her response to what was arguably the most public, dramatic proposal in Manhattan social history. When Paula finally spoke, her voice was clear and cold as winter rain. "Blake," she said, her words carrying across the silent ballroom like a judge delivering a verdict, "you told me you didn't owe me loyalty when it mattered most. Tonight, I want you to understand something important." Paula's hand moved to her engagement ring, not the one Blake had given her, but a new one, smaller and more elegant, that Blake hadn't noticed until this moment. "I don't give second chances to people who have to lose everything before they learn to value what they had," Paula continued, her voice steady and final. "I don't build futures with men who only fight for love when it's convenient or dramatic." Blake felt the world tilt around him as Paula placed his engagement ring, the 12-carat diamond he'd chosen so carefully, on the auction table beside them. "You had your chance to prove you understood what loyalty meant," Paula said, looking down at Blake with eyes that held no trace of the love that had once lived there. "You chose a business deal over our relationship. You chose Amanda's connections over my trust. You chose profit over love when it actually mattered." Paula stepped back, her voice carrying across the ballroom like a final benediction. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Blake. But you won't find it with me. That door is closed forever." With that, Paula turned and walked back to Jonathan, who wrapped her in his arms protectively, his expression mixing sympathy and firm resolve. They left the ballroom together, Paula's head held high, Jonathan's arm around her waist, looking every inch the power couple they'd become. Blake remained on his knees in the silent ballroom, surrounded by 500 witnesses to his complete and total destruction. The engagement ring caught the crystal chandelier light like a fallen star, and Blake realized he was looking at the physical remains of the only love story that had ever mattered to him. Society's elite began to murmur and move, processing what they'd just witnessed. Blake Shelton, one of the most powerful men in America, had just been publicly rejected by the woman he'd thrown away. It would be front-page news in every society publication, analyzed and dissected by business reporters and gossip columnists alike. But Blake didn't care about his public humiliation. He cared about the fact that Paula was gone forever, walking out of his life with another man's ring on her finger and not a single backward glance. Blake finally stood up, adjusted his tuxedo jacket with as much dignity as he could muster, and walked out of the ballroom alone. He left his engagement ring on the auction table, someone else's treasure now, since it meant nothing to the woman it had been created for. Outside the Plaza Hotel, Manhattan sparkled with its usual indifferent brilliance. Blake stood on the sidewalk, watching taxi lights blur through traffic, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. He'd just lost Paula forever, in the most public way possible, in front of everyone who mattered in his professional and social world. And somehow, it still felt like he'd gotten off easy compared to what he deserved. Chapter 9. The Storm Before the Reckoning. When billionaires become desperate, they don't just fight dirty. They wage war with the ruthless precision that built their empires, forgetting that queens don't just survive battles. They remember every weapon used against them. Blake Shelton sat in his penthouse office at 3 a.m, Manhattan's skyline glittering 40 floors below like fallen stars, his desk covered with documents that represented the systematic destruction of everything Paula Leal had built. The past 2 weeks since the gala had transformed Blake from a heartbroken man into something far more dangerous. A billionaire with nothing left to lose. His public humiliation at the Plaza Hotel had been front-page news for days. "Billionaire begs ex-fiancé," screamed the New York Post. The video of his desperate proposal had gone viral, viewed millions of times by people who found entertainment in watching powerful men crumble. But the media attention was nothing compared to the real damage. Blake's board had called emergency meetings to discuss his fitness for leadership. Major investors were quietly pulling out of deals. His empire was cracking, and he was about to ensure that Paula's world cracked with it. "Sir?" Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. Blake had been keeping his assistant working brutal hours as he planned his campaign. "The reports you requested are ready." "Send them in," Blake said, not looking up from the architectural contracts spread across his mahogany desk. 3 men entered Blake's office: private investigators, corporate lawyers, and a public relations specialist who specialized in reputation management. They represented the kind of weapons Blake had never needed to use before, but desperate times required desperate measures. "What do we have?" Blake asked, his voice carrying cold authority. Marcus Webb, the lead investigator, placed a thick folder on Blake's desk. "Everything you asked for, Mr. Shelton. Paula Leal's business connections, funding sources, client list, personal relationships." Blake opened the folder, scanning pages of information that represented months of investigation into every aspect of Paula's professional and personal life. Bank records, contract details, supplier agreements, a complete blueprint for destroying everything Paula had worked to build. "Her community center project," Blake said, pointing to a specific contract. "The main contractor is Morrison Construction. They owe me $12 million from a failed hotel development." "We could call in that debt," suggested David Chen, Blake's corporate attorney. "Force them into bankruptcy, make it impossible for them to complete Paula's project." Blake nodded, making notes. "What about her affordable housing initiative?" "Federal funding through the Urban Development Grant," Marcus replied, "but the approval process requires annual reviews. A few well-placed calls could trigger an investigation into the project's financial management." "Do it." Blake's voice was ice. "I want every project she's working on scrutinized until she can't function." Over the next week, Paula's world began to unravel with surgical precision. Morrison Construction suddenly demanded immediate payment, claiming cash flow problems that forced them to halt work on the community center. The steel supplier backed out of his contract, citing unforeseen complications. City permits that had been approved for months suddenly required additional environmental studies. Paula sat in her firm's conference room, surrounded by worried project managers and anxious contractors, trying to understand how everything had gone wrong simultaneously. "It doesn't make sense," said David Kim, her project manager. "Morrison has been reliable for 2 years. The permits were approved months ago." Paula studied the stack of cancellation notices, her architect's mind recognizing patterns her heart didn't want to acknowledge. Each cancellation mentioned different reasons, but they all shared one common thread: financial pressure from unnamed sources. But Paula's backup contractors were experiencing their own mysterious problems: sudden tax audits that froze their assets, banking complications that prevented them from taking on new projects, equipment rental companies that claimed their machinery was suddenly unavailable. By the end of the week, Paula's community center project was effectively dead. "This isn't coincidence," Paula told Jonathan over dinner at her apartment. "Someone is systematically targeting my projects." Jonathan reached across the table to take her hand. "Who would do something like that? And why?" Paula was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Manhattan's glittering skyline. Somewhere in those towers, she suspected Blake Shelton was orchestrating her professional destruction. "I don't know," Paula lied, not wanting to drag Jonathan into the war she could feel building. "But I'm going to find out." Meanwhile, Blake's campaign intensified. Using his vast network, he began pressuring Paula's clients directly. The law firm that had commissioned her suddenly decided to reassess their expansion plans. The non-profit organization abruptly announced budget cuts that eliminated the architectural budget entirely. Blake's weapons were sophisticated and nearly invisible. He never threatened anyone directly, never made demands that could be traced back to him. Instead, he simply reminded business leaders about favors owed, investments made, connections that might prove valuable. The message was clear. Supporting Paula Leal's projects was not in their best interests. Paula's firm began bleeding money as projects were cancelled and new contracts mysteriously failed to materialize. Her staff started updating their resumes as rumors spread through the industry about Paula Leal's business troubles. "We might have to let people go," Paula's business manager told her. "If we don't land new contracts soon, we won't be able to make payroll next month." Paula stared at the financial reports, seeing years of careful planning dissolving into chaos. Her firm wasn't just her business, it was her dream made real, her platform for changing the world. Watching it crumble felt like watching her own heart stop beating. But Paula Leal had not become one of the most successful architects in America by surrendering to obstacles. She was beginning to understand that Blake's war on her business had given her something she'd never had before, a reason to fight back with everything she possessed. That evening, Paula sat alone in her apartment, making phone calls to lawyers and financial advisors. She was no longer the heartbroken woman who had trusted in fairy tale love. She was a warrior who had been attacked, and warriors didn't just defend, they conquered. "Keisha," Paula called her assistant at 11 o'clock, "I need you to schedule meetings with 3 different law firms tomorrow. Corporate law specialists who handle complex situations." "What kind of complex situations?" Keisha asked, recognizing the steel in her boss's voice. "The kind that involve billionaires who think they can destroy people without consequences," Paula said, her voice carrying a coldness that would have made Blake Shelton nervous if he'd heard it. "Girl, are you sure you want to escalate this? Blake has resources you can't imagine." Paula looked out at Manhattan's skyline. Somewhere among those lights was the man who had once promised to love her forever and was now methodically destroying everything she'd built. "Blake thinks he knows what I'm capable of," Paula said quietly. "He's about to learn that he never really knew me at all." As Paula began formulating a plan that would make Blake's business warfare look like child's games, she had spent months studying his empire while they were together, learning about his investments, his vulnerabilities, his business relationships. Blake thought he was the only one who knew how to fight dirty. But he had forgotten something crucial about the woman he was trying to destroy. Paula Leal didn't just design buildings, she engineered solutions to impossible problems, and Blake Shelton was about to become her most challenging project yet. Chapter 10. Checkmate, King. When queens prepare for war, they don't announce their intentions. They simply move their pieces into position and watch empires fall with surgical precision. The emergency board meeting of Shelton Tech was called for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. That would be remembered as the day Manhattan's business world witnessed the most elegant corporate assassination in Wall Street history. Blake Shelton entered the boardroom with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. His systematic destruction of Paula's business had been flawless. Her community center was stalled, her housing projects tied up in red tape, her firm hemorrhaging money. Paula Leal was learning what happened to people who humiliated Blake Shelton in public. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake began, taking his place at the head of the table, "I know there have been concerns about my leadership. Today I want to address those concerns and reaffirm Shelton Tech's commitment to profitable growth." The 12 board members sat around the polished table, expressions carefully neutral. These were Manhattan's most powerful investors, people who had trusted Blake with billions. Margaret Whitmore, the board's senior member, cleared her throat. "Blake, before we begin, I should inform you that we have a new board member joining us today." Blake frowned. "New member? Margaret, we haven't voted on any new appointments." "Actually," a familiar voice said from the entrance, "you have." Blake's blood turned to ice as Paula Leal walked into the room, wearing a perfectly tailored black power suit that made her look like a warrior dressed for victory. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, her dark eyes meeting his with absolutely no warmth. "Hello, Blake," Paula said, her voice carrying across the silent boardroom like a blade. Surprise. Blake stared at Paula, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "What the hell are you doing here?" Paula took a seat at the far end of the table, directly opposite Blake. "I'm here as the newest member of Shelton Tech's board of directors. I've acquired enough shares over the past 3 months to earn a seat at this table." "That's impossible," Blake said, his voice tight with disbelief. "I would have been notified of any major stock purchases." Paula's smile was razor-sharp and absolutely devastating. "Not if those purchases were made through shell corporations and carefully structured financial instruments designed to avoid detection. Did you really think I spent 6 weeks crying over our breakup, Blake? I was building a war chest." Margaret consulted her notes. Ms. Leal's financial advisors have provided all necessary documentation. Her investment group now holds 23.7% of Shelton Tech stock, making her our largest individual shareholder after Blake himself. Blake felt the room tilt around him. 23%. That would cost $800 million. Paula finished smoothly. "Expensive, yes, but absolutely worth it for what I'm about to accomplish." Blake's mind raced. "Where did you get $800 million? Your firm doesn't have that kind of capital." Paula's laugh was like broken crystal, beautiful and dangerous. "You're right, Blake. My architectural firm doesn't have that kind of money, but my investors do. It's amazing how many people are willing to fund a project when the goal is removing an unstable CEO who's been sabotaging community development projects out of personal spite." "What investors?" "The Morrison Foundation, the Children's Hospital Network, 3 pension funds that prioritize socially responsible investing. Oh, and Dr. Jonathan Hayes, who liquidated his entire investment portfolio to support this acquisition." Each name hit Blake like a physical blow. Paula had assembled a coalition of institutions with massive influence and sterling reputations. Blake was suddenly cast as the villain in his own story. "This is corporate warfare," Blake said, his voice deadly quiet. "You can't just buy your way onto my board and—" "And what?" Paula interrupted. "Stop you from destroying community projects out of personal revenge, prevent you from using your wealth as a weapon against people who can't fight back." Paula stood up, moving to the windows overlooking Manhattan. "Blake, for the past month, you've been systematically destroying everything I built. You bankrupted my contractors, sabotaged my suppliers, pressured my clients and tried to ruin my firm because I rejected your public marriage proposal." Blake's jaw clenched. "You humiliated me in front of 500 people. I protected myself from a man who proved he couldn't be trusted with my heart," Paula said, turning back to face the boardroom. "But you decided to wage war against community centers and affordable housing projects. You decided to hurt families and children because your ego couldn't handle rejection." Paula returned to her seat. "So, I decided to teach you a lesson about consequences." Margaret cleared her throat. "Ms. Leal, what exactly are you proposing?" Paula's smile was absolutely terrifying in its calm certainty. "I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Blake Shelton's leadership as CEO of Shelton Tech." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Blake felt the world collapse as he realized the trap Paula had set. She hadn't just bought her way onto his board. She'd positioned herself to destroy him completely. "You can't do this," Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can," Paula said, consulting her legal documents. "Blake, your behavior over the past 2 months has been erratic, vindictive, and damaging to Shelton Tech's reputation. Your public breakdown was broadcast worldwide. Your systematic harassment of community development projects has been documented by legal firm. Your inability to focus on corporate responsibilities has resulted in missed opportunities worth over $2 billion. Paula looked around the table. This man is not fit to lead a company that employs 30,000 people and manages pension funds for millions of Americans. His personal vendettas have compromised his judgment beyond repair. Harrison Foster spoke up reluctantly. Blake, I've known you for 8 years. You built this company from nothing, but Ms. Leal is right about your recent behavior. The European expansion disaster, the missed acquisitions, the public relations nightmares. The stock price fluctuations alone have cost our investors hundreds of millions, added Jennifer Walsh. Blake, you're brilliant, but you're not stable right now. Blake looked around the table, seeing the truth in each face. These people had supported him for years, trusted him with their fortunes. Now they were looking at him like he was a liability. I built this company, Blake said desperately. I made you all rich beyond your wildest dreams. You can't just throw me away. We're not throwing you away, Margaret said gently. We're protecting the company from leadership that has become compromised. Paula opened her folder. I move that Blake Shelton be removed as Chief Executive Officer of Shelton Tech, effective immediately. I further move that all corporate assets under his direct control be transferred to a management committee pending new leadership selection. Seconded, said Harrison Foster immediately. All in favor? Margaret called for the vote that would end Blake's reign. One by one, hands rose around the table. Margaret, Harrison, Jennifer, David, Thomas, Sarah, Michael, Patricia, Robert, Linda, James, 11 hands. A unanimous vote of no confidence, with only Blake abstaining. The motion carries, Margaret announced formally. Blake Shelton is hereby removed as CEO of Shelton Tech. Blake sat in stunned silence as his entire world disintegrated. In less than 20 minutes, Paula had stripped him of everything he'd spent 15 years building. His company, his power, his legacy, all gone with a simple board vote. Security will escort you from the building, Paula said, her voice professionally calm. Your personal items will be packaged and sent to your apartment. Your access to all corporate systems has been terminated. Blake finally found his voice. Paula, you've destroyed me. Was that really worth it? Paula stood up, gathering her documents with precise efficiency. When she looked at Blake, her eyes held no triumph, no satisfaction, just cold finality. Blake, I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose revenge over growth, the moment you decided to hurt innocent people because your pride was wounded. I simply held you accountable for those choices. Paula moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to Blake one final time. You told me once that you didn't owe me loyalty. Today, I want you to understand something very clearly. I don't owe you mercy. Queens protect their kingdoms, Blake, and you threatened mine. With that, Paula Leal walked out of the boardroom, leaving Blake Shelton sitting alone at the table where he'd once commanded an empire. Security guards appeared within minutes, escorting the former billionaire CEO from the building he'd built. Outside on the Manhattan sidewalk, Blake stood in his expensive suit, homeless and powerless for the first time since he was a teenager. His penthouse, his cars, his lifestyle, all of it would disappear as quickly as his corporate position. Paula had done more than remove him from his company. She had systematically dismantled his entire life with the precision of a master architect demolishing a flawed structure. Blake Shelton had tried to wage war against a queen, and queens don't just win battles, they reshape entire kingdoms to ensure their enemies can never threaten them again. As Blake walked away from Shelton Tower for the last time, Paula watched from the 42nd floor, her engagement ring from Jonathan catching the afternoon light. She felt no joy in Blake's destruction, no satisfaction in his defeat. She felt only the quiet peace that comes from solving an impossible problem with elegant precision. Blake had taught her that she didn't need a king to be a queen. Today, she had taught him that queens don't forgive, they conquer.